Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the latest in our virtual health series for families. I am Zara Arboleta with Valley Children's Healthcare, joined today by Pediatric Psychologist Dr. Merideth Wirstiuk. Dr. Wirstiuk, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
I have lost all sense of time. I think I can speak for everybody during this pandemic. I don't know up from down, day from night, and we're just kind of in this weird spot right now. So thank you for, again, joining us today. Why don't you give our viewers at home just a quick introduction as to who you are and your specialty here at Valley Children's?
Absolutely. So like you mentioned, I'm one of the pediatric psychologists here at Valley Children's. So what we do is really sort of where that intersection between medical illness and psychology meets. So we work with children who have medical conditions and co-occurring mental health concerns as well. My specialty areas are working in our cystic fibrosis clinic and then also in our rehabilitation program.
So today's topic, we've covered a multitude of topics during our various virtual health series that we've been holding. Today's is COVID-19 and back to school stress. So many school districts now reopening. Some of the bigger ones throughout our valley open next week. And obviously, Dr. Wirstiuk, things look a lot different now than the first day of school last fall. And so for those people watching at home, please feel free to submit your questions here on Facebook. You can also tweet us or send us messages on Instagram, and we'll get the questions to Dr. Wirstiuk. But first off, the number one question we've been receiving over the past few days as we've been soliciting questions is, how can I address my child's anxiety as we begin the new school year online this year?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You know, I think understandably, like you said, this is a time of a lot of uncertainty. We've never started a school year being online and meeting new teachers and new classmates, and all of that being virtual, I think adds a lot of extra challenges that understandably causes anxiety. So I think, you know, the way that we can address that for our kids is just being mindful of that and really acknowledging anxiety is a normal thing right now. So I think, you know, for our children, talking to them about what it is that's causing that anxiety for them and normalizing it's okay to feel a little worried right now so that we can best support them and help them kind of open up about what it is that they're concerned about. The other thing is just having a routine and kind of a new normal for them. So kids thrive on structure and routine. So the more that we can kind of establish that even at home with having a regular time you get up in the morning, a regular bedtime routine, you know, having breaks scheduled throughout the day to kind of give them a break from some of their virtual learning and kind of incorporating their coping strategies in that. You know your child best, so knowing what it is that helps them recharge, whether it be getting creative about how to be social with friends online or finding other outlets for them, but really trying to focus on how you can help them be resilient during this time.
So how do you talk to specifically the younger kids, maybe first grade through fourth grade, the ones who are still super excited to get up in the morning and put their backpacks on and go see their friends? How do you prepare them right now for the fact that no, they can't see their friends or see their new teacher yet, that classes are going to be held for many kids, just like we're doing this Facebook Live right now via Zoom?
Yeah, I think, you know, the most important thing is not being afraid to talk to them about it. Lots of kids are really aware that things are different and a lot of what's going on has gotten to them, whether they've seen it through the news or heard parents talking. So I think first off, not being afraid to bring those things up with your kids and really asking them what it is that they know. So we don't want to necessarily inundate them with tons of information that might overwhelm them, but start with what is it that you know? What questions do you have? And then being able to answer those in a way that's appropriate for their age and their understanding level. And then once you have a better understanding of what their concerns are, I think that can kind of help guide you in terms of how you can support them during this time. You know, for us, we may be thinking they're so worried about getting sick, but their biggest concern might be they don't get to see their friends, you know, at the beginning of the day or play with them at recess. So really, you know, the more we understand where they're coming from, the more we can kind of tailor our response to them.
So we are talking about back to school stress today. Obviously, it's not just a stressor on the students, but on their parents. We were talking about this when we were preparing last week. I've got two kids, one getting ready to go to sixth grade, one getting ready to go to seventh grade. I work from home most of the time. The stress I feel is palpable at times, thinking about how to manage this. What tips do you have for moms, dads, and guardians, or if it's grandparents taking care of the kids? What tips do you have for us older folks when it comes to handling the stress of back to school being online, of all classes being online right now?
Yeah, I think first, just like you said, acknowledging like that we have stress too. I think a lot of times we're thinking about our kids' stress level, but a lot of what affects our kids is how we're doing and how we're coping with things too. And we're always kind of that role model for our kids. So they're looking to us to see how we're dealing and coping with things. And that's a clue to them about how they can deal and cope with things. So I think being mindful, first of all, of how you are dealing with it, and then making sure you have those supports in place for yourself. Having a good support network, especially now, is so important. Whether it's, your spouse or other parents, relatives, having people that you can kind of rely on to have that outlet for yourself. And I think taking time for yourself too is super important. It's hard because I think parents right now are thrust into that role of being everything for their families. They're teachers and they're working from home often and juggling a lot of different things, and just being able to say, like, you're doing your best and that's all that you can do, and nobody is perfect. So I don't think anyone's expecting perfection from you. Your child doesn't expect perfection from you. They just want to know that you're there for them.
That is so key. And thank you, not only as a coworker, but as somebody talking to a mom here, for saying you can throw perfection out the window. There's so much pressure on everybody to do their absolute best all the time, and it gets tough. And someone asked here, it's interesting, and it breaks my heart, but someone asked, is it my fault that my children are having a hard time adapting to this new COVID-19 life?
That breaks my heart too. It's nobody's fault. Kids, they struggle for different reasons. Kids have different personalities, different ways that they cope with things. They may be more or less social. And I think all of those things go into how a child might cope with things. And some kids are just more sensitive to stress, And so I think just the best thing you can do as a parent is be in tune with your child. It's not your fault if they're struggling, but you know your child best. So being in tune with, knowing when something might be a little bit off for them and talking to them about that. Talking about what it is that's bothering them, and really focusing on what are their strengths, what are the things that they do well that help them recharge, and making sure as best as possible you can help them, engage in those activities. It is more challenging for kids, I think, that are more social, because we do have to be more creative right now in terms of finding ways that they can connect with friends. But just the families that I've worked with have given me lots of examples of creative ways to do that, whether it's, FaceTime or watching movies together or playing games through like digital platforms and things like that. One of the best things I think is that kids this generation are really good with technology. And so they have some really creative ways, that they can connect, which I think is such a plus during this kind of strange, socially isolated time.
So that brings us, it's a perfect segue into our next question. One parent asks, how can we get a handle of our children being on their computers or tablets all day?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because like we said just now, it can be a really positive, good tool, but that's a double-edged sword, and it's something that we definitely have to be mindful of. What we know is that screen time is something that should be monitored by parents, and both for young kids who should have like really limited screen time, but also for teenagers that really need to be monitored in terms of what they're using in terms of their media and how they're kind of absorbing information. We want to be making sure that we're setting parameters on those things. And I think especially during this time, being mindful, just because they're using these platforms for school doesn't mean that that's not screen time that's affecting them too. And we want to make sure we're limiting that time so they have other time to go outside and exercise, be with family, do other activities that are just as important for their development. Making sure there are times that are screen-free, especially before bedtime, is super important so they can get good rest. But also, safety with social media is so important. in terms of monitoring what it is that our kids are taking in. So as parents, it's our responsibility to be mindful of those things, because there's a lot out there that isn't necessarily safe for our kids to be absorbing. So making sure we're using parental controls, making sure that when kids are using media that they're in the same room as us so we can monitor that. And I think especially for older kids, having a conversation about what is safe in terms of the internet and what's safe in terms of information that you shouldn't be giving to others, you know, and the risks of being online.
Just last week, Fresno County Sheriff's Department conducted this huge 2-week raid where they arrested dozens of people. The investigators posed as young children, and they were able to track down people who obviously were on the internet for nefarious reasons. So if you don't mind, again, I know you touched on it briefly, what are some of the safety tips you want to remind parents? Because we talked about this before too. When schools first shut down and I went to working from home, I admittedly was not paying as close attention to what my kids were doing, because I was like, oh, I've got 4 hours of Zoom meetings. You guys go play on your computers for a bit. So remind parents like me who might have been checked out at first what we need to be doing when it comes to monitoring social media activity.
Absolutely. I think, you know, especially for younger kids shouldn't be, you know, absorbing any kind of media on their own at that age, you know, when we're talking about really young kids. You should be checking these things beforehand, making sure you're watching things that they might be watching, making sure you're checking out any apps that you might want them to play games on, to kind of see if they're educational, but also to make sure that there's nothing sort of inherently harmful. And I think doing those things together also. So if your kid is watching something, watching it with them, you know, being there, kind of supporting them. And then as they get older, you know, still making sure that you're, you know, observing what it is that they're doing. So again, having them in the same room. There's lots of great parental controls that you can put on, you know, tablets or phones in terms of what kids are able to access. So I'd encourage people to look up their different devices and what kind of controls they can set on those things for sure. But having a conversation, especially as kids get older, about the information that they're absorbing. I think there's a lot of misinformation we know out there. And so, you know, it's important as parents for us to be mindful of what our kids are taking in.
One parent writes in, what are some signs that my teenager needs more emotional support during this time? What are some signs that we might need additional support from our pediatrician and or behavioral health professional?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great question, and I'm glad they're already thinking about the people that they can reach out to for support, because that's absolutely what I would say is reach out to your pediatrician or a mental health professional. You know, first and foremost, you know your kid best. So if you're worried that something might seem off for you, it's always best to check in both with your kid, but also, you know, with your pediatrician, just to kind of have them maybe evaluate further. Signs, especially for teenagers, that things might be more challenging for them from a coping perspective would be any kind of changes in behavior. So if they're, you know, showing changes in sleeping habits or appetite, they seem more irritable, if they're more, you know, down or sad than they typically are, or excessively worried or stressed to the point where you feel like they maybe can't control that on their own. You know, those are some signs and symptoms. Withdrawal from other people too, not seeming to enjoy activities that they usually would, I think are all different kind of red flags that we should look for in terms of seeing whether our child might be struggling a little more and need more support.
One parent writes in, what can we do to keep our children's emotions intact? And how do we teach them not to be afraid of going outside again?
Oh, that's a good question and a tough question. I think, you know, again, we talk about anxiety is a really understandable response to what's going on right now. I think a lot of people have anxiety and fear about this pandemic and how it can affect them. And I think for kids who, you know, hear a lot of these things, but they're not maybe able to understand or rationalize, you know, how they can keep themselves safe, I think it ends up with them being very fearful. So I think as, you know, parents, what we can do is again, kind of check in with them about what are their fears about going outside, you know, and what is it that they're understanding in terms of, you know, the safety of things, and really helping them focus on what it is that they can control. You know, with kids, uncertainty often leads to anxiety. So the more we can put things in their control and give them choices, but also empower them that, you know, if we're doing things like social distancing, wearing our masks, practicing good hand hygiene. You know, there's lots of things that we can still do safely, still be able to go outside in our backyard and play, or go for a walk with mom and dad, and really helping them see, you know, that there are still things they can do to keep themselves safe.
Someone else asks, I know you already talked earlier, like perfection's not the goal. Let's get that out of our heads, that everything has to be perfect. But someone did ask, what expectations should parents have around academics? I am afraid I will stress out my child, is what this parent says.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. You know, I think academics are really different, and I think some parents had a taste of this towards the end of last school year in terms of the challenges of doing things online, and I think especially starting a new school year, that can be challenging. I think first and foremost, the most important thing to focus on is effort rather than outcome. So, you know, if you're seeing your child trying their best to do their schoolwork and you're supporting them to be as successful as possible, that's the most important thing right now, rather than specifically what the outcome of that is, what grades are. You know, I'm talking with teachers about what are academic expectations and how does that adapt to be online, because some kids, you know, may make that transition really easily, and for other kids that might be a lot more challenging, whether it's that they have more difficulty focusing when it's online, or just, you know, the fact of being online is a little bit more challenging. So I think, you know, just meeting your child where they're at is most important, and helping them be as successful as they can be, you know, with supports in place. But again, focusing on, you know, helping them put forth their best effort.
All right, for those of you just tuning in, welcome to the latest installment of our Facebook series, our virtual health series for families. Joined today by Pediatric Psychologist Dr. Merideth Wirstiuk, answering your questions. Just put them right here in the comments on Facebook. You can also tweet us or send us a message on Instagram. One parent writes, how important is preschool? I cannot decide if I should send my 4-year-old or not.
That's a tough question, and definitely a personal question for parents in terms of what their comfort level is. I think, you know, preschool is super important in terms of it helps with social and emotional development. It helps, you know, in terms of like language development, and it's really something that we often rely on to help prepare kids for that transition to school in terms of kindergarten and things like that. But the great thing is there are lots of things that we can do at home to work on those developmental skills as well. You know, things like reading to your child that helps their language development, but also helps them with skills like being able to sit still and listen, which is something that kids learn in preschool too. You know, things like setting up a routine for them at home, learning to transition from one activity to another, you know, things like, you know, taking turns, you know, even things that are like social skills you can work on with your child at home, whether it's with siblings or it could be just with parents too, but learning how to take turns, learning how to be, you know, social with other people. They're all skills that we can work on at home. And most importantly, play. Kids learn by playing. And so, you know, as long as we're giving them those opportunities at home to be creative and play and do different things, I think we're working on those developmental skills at home too. So even if they can't be in preschool, they're not totally missing out or going to be behind.
Someone just posted this question on our Facebook page. Are there tips for coping with stress with toddlers and pre-verbal children? How can we help them ease through this whole time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because a lot of times our kids may not have, you know, the verbal skills to be able to explain to us that they're stressed or they're noticing something is different. You know, for younger kids, a lot of times what we see is maybe more irritability. That could be more crying or clinginess, you know, but kids, even that young, still pick up on changes in routine and things being different. They may not know why, but they're noticing those differences. And I think, again, as parents, what we can do is kind of help them understand what the new routine is. So again, setting up those expectations so they know what to expect of their day. And I think helping with that uncertainty can help kids that young cope better when they know what to expect.
One parent writes, how do I help keep my child focused? He has ADHD.
That's a great question. Yeah. I think, you know, like we spoke about before, you know, some kids do have more challenges in terms of like concentration. And for those with ADHD, it's absolutely more challenging, especially when we think about online schooling being a lot of staring at a screen all day. And so I think it's important to, again, set some structure and routine to their day, but really allowing for more support too. So, having a space where they can work that's free of distractions for them. So, if they're on their computer, they don't have other electronics around, there's no TV or toys or other things that would be easily, distracting for them. And so they have a space that they can just focus. And then, having some sort of organization system for them. For kids with ADHD, oftentimes it's hard for them to stay organized. So they may need more help from you and from their teacher in terms of how to stay organized. A good thing to use is like a visual schedule too, so they know what to expect out of their day, and that can help with transitioning from one activity to another. Making sure they get breaks, just like they do in school, to kind of wiggle around or run around. It's important for them to have those breaks too from virtual school also. And especially for kids with ADHD, it might be harder for them to sit still, so they may need more frequent breaks. So I think an important thing is talking with their teacher about what kind of accommodations they may need too, because they may have something like an individualized education plan or a 504 plan already, or it could be something that they qualify for that would give them some extra accommodations too. So it's always important to be in touch with the school. If you're finding that you're not able to accommodate as well at home, they may need more support.
So something that has been making headlines and something Valley Children's has stood by, the position we've had from the very beginning is that kids are obviously better off in school, emotionally, developmentally. There are children who rely on schools for food because their families are food insecure. So no one questions the fact that kids are better off in school. Obviously, Valley Children's position being, it's a matter of when they should return to school.
Yeah.
So the question a lot of families have is, how do we help our kids while they're at home for now? How do we help them maintain their emotional strength when they pretty much have no social interactions other than something like Zoom or an occasional conference call? So how do you help fill the void of the lack of interaction with other kids and emotional development and behavioral development when they're not physically in school right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think every kid is different, and so their strengths are different, and the things that they do to recharge are different. So like we talked about before, yes, it's good to be creative with social, socialization online and be connected, but I think, that comes with a balance of, we can't just rely on that because that is limited and it's not the same as being with kids in person. So I think the most important thing that we can do is balance that with having other good coping skills. So, making sure first and foremost our kids' basic needs are met. So are they getting enough sleep at night? Regular meals and snacks, getting exercise, getting outside and getting fresh air. All of these things are important for our kids and are part of a school day typically that they may not be getting at home. So making sure we're having those things as part of their structure and routine. And then encouraging them to try different things, whether it's, arts and crafts or music or other things that might be, soothing for them, something that can help them recharge, different interests or hobbies that they might be enjoying, and finding ways to incorporate those things into their schedules at home too, so that it's not just that they're relying on the little bit of socialization they might get on Zoom, that they have lots of other things that are, providing, that support for them and bringing, a sense of fun to their day too.
So a lot of schools obviously are in online instruction mode. They're already sending out schedules. They're going to have a curriculum and textbook pickups and all those types of things. We're getting a lot of questions from parents of preschool age children. And so they want to know, they're looking for any suggestions for curriculum for them. Do you know of any resources they might be able to find online? Maybe just to help those. I know you mentioned some activities like learning how to share and take your turn and reading time. Any more structured resources that you can potentially direct them to?
Yeah, so a really good resource is 0 to 3. So that's like the number 0 to 3. It's a resource out there. They have like a website with lots of information really geared towards preschool, young kids and preschool age kids in terms of how do you foster their development. And they've had a lot of great posts and articles recently about how you can focus on those things at home as well. So it's a really good resource for parents in terms of, knowing where your child is at developmentally, and then being able to have some more structured ideas and activities to do with them at home.
Okay, so that website was Zero, like writing out ZERO.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I just found it.
Exactly.
Okay. So for the parent who just left that question on Facebook, it is 0to3.org. Thanks, Dr. Wirstiuk. That's a good one. You were talking earlier about the importance of routines and getting kids back on track and on a schedule. One parent wrote in a few days ago, what can I do about my child who has circadian rhythm disorder? She's an only child. I worry that without any social interaction with her peers, she sleeps during the day, active all night. What can I do to help her stay connected and keep her on track?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Obviously, that poses an extra challenge for sure. And I think, some of those strategies we talked about do apply in terms of having a good routine. I think especially important is good sleep hygiene. So when I say that, I mean, having a good routine before bed, turning off electronics before bed, having an expectation of bedtime and activities that we can do before that, and then having a good, wake time in the morning. And I think it's challenging, I know, as an only child, because you're not able to rely on siblings or other people as much. But I think, having those interactions, even with a parent, can be helpful. Engaging them in playing board games, or going outside, taking a walk together as a family, activities that can kind of be stimulating both in terms of having fun, but also in waking us up. So, for somebody that struggles with sleep, going for a walk in the morning is a great way of getting some sunlight, getting some exercise, and kind of waking us up so we can kind of be more ready for our day too. So trying to incorporate a lot of those strategies. But I would also say, talk with your pediatrician if you're finding some of these behavioral strategies aren't sort of sufficient enough, because they may have some more suggestions for your particular child too.
Okay. Thank you for that. Someone else writes in, what resources are available for teenagers who might be showing signs of depression due to social isolation from friends, family members, and school?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, as we know, a lot of teenagers in general, struggle with depression. And I think especially when we think about that, social distancing and social isolation, it can lead to stronger feelings of depression. So I think first and foremost, wanting to make sure your child is safe, right? If they're expressing any thoughts about wanting to hurt themselves or wanting to end their life, that's an emergent situation where you want to get help right away. So that could be taking them to the local emergency room, calling 911. There's lots of hotlines out there as well that can talk to your child in a crisis situation. So I think those are the best resources if we're dealing with sort of an emergent situation. If you know that your child is safe, but that they're just struggling with some more depression, I think thinking about other resources. So there's NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And they are an operation that helps with finding resources for families, but they also have online support groups and lots of different resources for teenagers and for adults in terms of helping them get connected with resources if they're struggling with depression. I think for teenagers also, schools can be a good resource too. So your school counselor might have resources for, referrals for more support. Your pediatrician is a good place to start as well. And also going through your insurance to find a provider that's covered by your insurance. There's always a number on the back of your insurance card that talks about mental health support that you can get a list of providers that are covered for you too.
What do you want to say to those families where they might still feel this stigma when it comes to asking for help, when it comes to mental health and behavioral health issues?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think stigma is something that, is a big part of mental health a lot of times, even if we don't want it to be, and especially if I don't want it to be as a provider, and I think it's hard to combat that if that's something that we've, heard, whether it's in the media that we've heard, about, that it's not okay to seek mental health support. But I think, what we've seen from this pandemic is that everybody is struggling. And so struggling is the normal right now. And there's no shame in getting help, because the more that we can help ourselves, the more we can help our community, help those around us. And, support is there for a reason. Lots of people need support, and that's okay. It's really normal for you to need support. It's just like physical health. If you have a cold, you go to the doctor. This is really similar. Our emotional health is just as important as our physical health, and we need to treat it that way too.
I see a lot of chatter on social media, Dr. Wirstiuk, from parents who are like, my child's supposed to start kindergarten. I know I'm supposed to be strong, but I really wanted that first day of school pick and this and that.
Yeah.
What do you want to say to those parents? And the interesting thing is they feel almost guilty for feeling sad. But that is a milestone in a parent's life, is dropping off their child to their kindergarten teacher. And that's not happening for virtually everybody in our area right now. So what do you want to say to those moms and dads who are also struggling on a very personal level to also be missing out on milestones that their 5-year-old probably doesn't, it doesn't even register for their kids sometimes?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I want to say, I totally understand that. And I think it's so important to let yourself feel sad about those things. Like, that is a really big milestone in your child's life, whether, like you said, as a 5-year-old, they really understand that, probably not. But as a parent, it's something you've imagined probably since you had your child, taking them to their first day of school and all those experiences. And I think, it's okay to grieve those things. And I think it's important to let yourself feel that way. We often feel like we should feel a certain way, or we should be able to handle something, but truthfully, it's okay to be sad, just like for kids that might be missing out on experiences, whether it be, like sports, seasons, or, they're in theater, things like that. We want our kids to be allowed to feel sad, and we should be able to, as parents too, feel sad about some of those experiences we're missing out on.
Someone asks, what are your thoughts on physically going back to school, safety versus social and mental development?
Okay, well, I know you kind of touched on this before, Zara, in terms of course, mental health and, emotional well-being are as important as physical health. But that being said, this isn't a normal time. And so I think, what I've relied on is our health experts kind of letting us know when that's going to be safe. And I think, what I focused on is the things that I can do right now to keep myself safe, and the behaviors that we can all kind of engage in so that hopefully we're there sooner, rather than later. And that's, wearing my mask, practicing social distancing, following all those guidelines. So I think I look forward to the day when it's safe for us to go back, because I agree that I think it'll be great for all of our kids socially and emotionally.
So speaking of when that time does come and everybody can go back to the classroom, for those parents who do choose to go back to the classroom when it's deemed safe to do so, lots of parents are asking, how do you help plan for preparing your kids to actually go back to school? And how do you prepare them for potentially things like having to wear a mask all day long, or maybe there are plexiglass shields that the classrooms will look very different potentially than when they left them last spring? How do you help your kids adjust to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty about what that will even look like when we do go back. And so I think, what we can do is get as much information as possible. So, if and when that time comes, talking with your school about what is their plan in terms of how they're keeping kids safe and what that might look like, and then having those frank discussions with your kids about what they can expect, so setting them up for knowing what their classroom is going to look like, and also what the expectations for them will be. Are they expected to be distanced from their friends? Are they expected to wear masks? Are they expected, to do certain things still virtually, even if they're going in person for some of the time? In terms of wearing masks, I think that especially for young kids, can be a struggle in terms of getting them comfortable doing that. So I think that's an important skill that parents can start practicing right now in terms of getting their child used to wearing a mask. For young kids that might not be comfortable doing that, starting with, having a stuffed animal wear it to make it a little bit more normal, modeling mom and dad wearing it or older sibling wearing it, and then being able to get them used to it by slowly increasing the time that they wear it at home too. Whether it's, you wear it just when you're playing for a few minutes, you wear it for a walk around the block, but working up time, knowing that if they do go back to school, it might be expected that they're wearing it for 7 or 8 hours a day.
Someone just wrote in, I am an essential worker. My children are in daycare. How can I prepare them emotionally and make sure they're okay emotionally? I'm not sure if the question is because, this person does have to go to work all the time and has to take their child to daycare. So how does this parent help navigate that?
In terms of, I guess, adjusting to being in daycare,
it probably sounds like because this person has to go to work, therefore their children do have to go to daycare.
Yeah.
So how do you help prepare the children for having to go to daycare in a time when everything else is shut down? Sounds like that's what this question is. Yeah.
I think that's a great question. I've heard of lots of different daycares employing a lot of different safety measures. So I think first and foremost, talking with your daycare about, what are they doing to keep people safe? What does that look like in terms of, a lot of times drop off or pickup might be different now for parents, or, they may have a different amount of kids in their classroom. They might be required to wash their hands more frequently. Maybe they're getting their temperature taken, but really getting to the specifics, I think, especially for young kids, of what the program is doing so that they can prepare their kids for that, and almost doing like a practice, at home, like, okay, let's take our temperature, let's practice washing our hands, all the skills that they may be expected to do in daycare, practicing those at home and trying to make it maybe a fun experience for them. So it takes away some of that maybe scariness or uncertainty with it. So by the time they're going to daycare, they practice and they kind of know what to expect.
Back to the mental health question. After we were speaking about it, we're getting more questions coming in for that, Dr. Wirstiuk. And one parent writes, how do we as parents go about even telling our primary care doctor about mental health concerns for my child?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What I've noticed, at least, with pediatricians that we've worked with here at the hospital, is that, it's an important conversation and it's something that they're really open to. There's no right or wrong way to say you're concerned. I think you call and you just express what your concerns are. Pediatricians, like they focus on physical health, they also are focused on mental health, and that's part of your child's wellness. So I think not being afraid to pick up the phone and call and just explain what it is that you're concerned about, whether it's certain symptoms or you want them to be screened for depression or anxiety. They have lots of different tools that they can use to kind of help you assess what's going on with your child. But more than anything, pick up the phone and don't be worried about saying the right thing. Just start the conversation.
I've always found that pediatricians are some of the most patient people on earth because they're dealing with worried hypochondriac parents. And so yeah, I do like that you're telling people just call, it's okay. And along those same lines, one parent just wrote in and said, what are some ways that I myself can check in with my child? Or do you have any questions to suggest how to assess how they're doing for parent to child?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think starting with open-ended questions. So rather than asking your child like, oh, do you feel sad? Say, like, how have things been going? And leave it open to conversation so that a child can kind of engage in conversation rather than sort of a yes-no conversation. I think we've all had those with teenagers where you're like, oh, how's your day? And they say fine, and then that's the end of the conversation. Yeah. But really trying to engage them in more of those open-ended questions. I think also, a little bit of self-disclosure as a parent, being open to talking to them about what you're struggling with, and that it's okay to be struggling right now, I think can help them feel more comfortable with sharing with you what's going on. Letting them know like when you've had a stressful day, and then checking in with them about their day. It gives them that opportunity to sort of say, oh yeah, I struggled with this too.
One parent was asking earlier, and it's along these lines, how can you tell if something's wrong with your kid and it might be time to take that next step and call someone else?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think first and foremost, like, your child best, right? So, as a parent, you've gotten to know your child, you know sort of what's normal for them. And it may be, that you're noticing some of these signs, like we've talked about, increased irritability or withdrawal from friends, or, more sadness, more isolation, so it could be those signs, but it also could be you as a parent just sense something being off with them, and maybe you're not able to sort of label it, in any of those categories. And I think that's okay, because, as a parent, you're the expert on them. And so you're able to tell, if something's going on. And then, like we talked about before, it's a good thing to start a conversation with them. But if you have a parent's intuition something's going on, it's okay to reach out for that extra support just based on intuition alone too.
One parent is asking, because you had great suggestions for curriculum for preschool age children. This one parent is asking, do you know of any online support groups for teenagers who are following social distance guidelines due to medical issues or physician recommendations? Do you know of any groups or websites?
In terms of, you said like online support groups and things like that?
For teenagers.
For teenagers.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned before, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, they have some online support groups that have, I think they've recently increased how many they have because of the pandemic going on. So that can be a good source of support if they're struggling emotionally. But like you said, following those social distancing guidelines, and so they're not seeing friends in person. And there's a Fresno specific office, but you can go to their website, which is NAMI.org. It's NAMI.
Okay, great, fantastic. NAMI.org for resources for teens there. Someone asks, can you share some examples of modeling calm behavior, or when to model calm behavior and decision-making for our children?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, it's tough to stay calm as a parent, and part of that is also acknowledging that you might not feel calm, but then you're modeling the calm behavior. So sort of out loud, even saying like, oh, I'm noticing myself getting stressed, and maybe point out some of the signs that you notice that, like, oh, I'm noticing my heart is starting to race, or I'm noticing my breathing is changing. I think I'm feeling stressed. And then it's sort of almost out loud, you're kind of talking through what you're doing. I'm going to take a break and go calm down, or I'm going to take some deep breaths, and kind of model for your child walking through that, and then talking about how you feel afterwards too. So it's bringing your thinking process kind of out loud for kids so they can kind of follow along to what you're doing.
All right, someone is also asking along those same lines, what are examples of healthy routines, especially in a time where nothing is routine for my family, is what this person writes.
I think that's such a fair question. And, part of this is like cutting yourself a little bit of slack. I don't mean you have to have every second of every day planned, because that's just not realistic. So first off, start with a routine that you're going to be able to follow. The best routine is not a good routine for your family if it's not realistic, right? So starting with the basics of, I always say, like, start with kind of the benchmarks of the time that you wake up or your child is waking up, the time they go to bed. And then you kind of fill in from there. So what else is important? Well, for bed, we need to have a good bedtime routine. So no electronics the hour before, doing relaxing activities, whether it be bath or shower time, reading books, all those things filling in that hour. Thinking about, okay, if they wake up at whatever time and school starts at this time, what needs to happen in between? So, helping them with their daily routine, what they have to do to get ready for the day, making sure breakfast, lunch, and dinner are planned, having snack time, filling in the time that school stuff might be going on, and then making sure that as much as you're planning and scheduling those have-tos, you're also scheduling the want-tos, which are the fun activities for kids. So, whether it's family time for dinner or family game night or things like that, but making sure that you're filling in those things so it's a balance of activities that they have to do and activities that they're excited about that, like we said, help them cope, recharge, and energize them.
There are parents sending us messages saying thank you for directing them on when to call the pediatrician for when they think their child might need some mental help or help for behavioral or mental illness or depression. One parent is asking, when should I ask for help if I'm struggling, and what can I do?
I think that's a great question, and just as important, like we've said, as helping your kid is helping yourself, right? Because, you know, it's sort of like the analogy they always say, you know, on airplanes, you put on your oxygen mask first. And I think that's so true of our mental health too. You know, we need to be taking care of ourselves so we can be there for our kids, you know, in the long term. So I think noticing, you know, again, any changes for yourself. So, you know, whatever your normal coping strategies are, if those aren't available right now, if you're, you know, usually really relying on coworkers and now you're working from home, or, you know, you're very social and you like to go out and you're not able to do those things, you know, trying to find other activities. But if you're finding like you're really struggling, I think those are a good time to reach out for extra support. You know, whether you're reaching out to family members or you're recognizing, hey, I might need more, you know, professional support. Again, you know, that can be reaching out to your doctor, going through your insurance to find mental health support for yourself. I think, you know, those are just as important.
There was a study that came out. I can't remember where it was. I can't remember if it was the LA Times or the New York Times. I saw it last week, Dr. Wirstiuk, that showed that obviously the pandemic has been a huge stressor on all parents. But the study was a very anecdotal one, nothing super scientific, but they found, at least anecdotally, that moms in particular were taking the brunt of the pressure of juggling online, you know, the schoolwork, the kids, their own jobs. What do you want to say to the moms out there? Because we're so conditioned to try to be super mom and to do everything. At a certain point though, we start to crack. So what is some advice you want to give to, in this particular case? I know dads are doing a lot of the work too, but you know, this article was really eye-opening that a lot of moms have this super mom mentality when that's not realistic right now.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. You know, a lot of times we also talk about sort of not just like who's physically doing things in a family, but sort of the mental load. And I think a lot of, you know, moms take that on in terms of, you know, planning their kids' schedules and how is everything going to get done. And I think as moms, you know, we feel that pressure that then that's on us to be able to do everything and do it with a smile on our face and not be stressed about it, right? And again, we talked about perfection before and what's realistic, and that's just not realistic for people. So I think, again, at this time, it's, you know, thinking about like what are the most important things and focusing on those and letting things go. And I think there's such a power in being able to let some things go and rely on other people for support. You know, this is the time where we need to delegate to other people, you know, whether it's to our spouses or other family members, or also acknowledge some things can be let go for a little bit. Not everything is equally important. And so knowing like these are the things I'm going to focus my energy on, and I'm going to let these other things go, and that's okay.
All right. I'm going to make you write that to me in email so I can print it out and frame it in my bedroom. And so
I think we all need it hanging up, you know?
I think we all do. That's for sure. And then someone was asking, because you're talking about modeling the way. If we're calm, our kids are more likely to be calm. If we're positive, our kids are more likely to be positive. Along those same lines, someone asks, someone said here, I've been super careful about statements I use during COVID-19 because I don't want to stress out my kids. Are there positive statements or phrases I can use when speaking to my children about the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this kind of goes back to what we mentioned before about focusing on things that we can control during this time. So, you know, there is, of course, a lot of uncertainty, and I think that, again, like leads to a lot of anxiety, but thinking about, you know, focusing on statements like, I'm doing everything that I can to keep myself safe. The things that I do that help me feel better are, you know, washing my hands, you know, social distancing, wearing a mask, and those things help me feel safe. You know, when I do those things, I know that I'm going to stay safe, you know, so making those kind of reassuring statements, I think, to our kids about, again, what's under our control and what we have control over that can help us kind of cope with what's going on right now.
No, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Wirstiuk. We actually were able to get through all the questions. And on a personal note, thanks, because I feel like I just had my own therapy session here. You've given me some really good tools I feel that I can now incorporate at home, because like it's been such an incredibly disruptive time for everybody. And so Thank you again for all of your advice and all of your wisdom. It is very much appreciated.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
All right, thank you again to Dr. Merideth Wirstiuk, pediatric psychologist here at Valley Children's. For those of you, again, watching at home, and I heard my dad was watching, so hi, Dad, is what the team told me. So we do have a COVID-19 hotline that is staffed by our nurses, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week. And so that number is area code 559-353-3333. Again, that is 353-3333. We also have a toll-free number. It's 888-286-9336, 888-286-9336. We've got graphics for you. We'll put the links on our website, on our Facebook page. And also for those of you watching at home, any time of day, you can go to valleychildrens.org/COVID-19. So valleychildrens.org/COVID-19. That takes you to a special dedicated section of our website where we list the hotline there. We list the latest research and the latest studies and statistics from the CDC, from the State Health Department. We have a list there also of resources to Dr. Wirstiuk's point, activities you could do with your kids, community resources. Also, there's a link to testing sites throughout the Valley from Bakersfield to up to Stanislaus County, the Modesto area. So go on there. Thank you all again for tuning in. Dr. Wirstiuk, thank you for your time. Have a great day. Wear your mask and stay safe, everyone. Bye.